Going off-road indoors. Well, sort of. Let's talk micro crawlers, micro courses, and have a look at this little project that I've been working on. Hello everyone and welcome. If you're like me, a huge part of the enjoyment of this hobby is getting outside and enjoying nature while also putting my RC vehicles to the test. While I'm very fortunate to live in an area where there's no shortage of great spots to do some RC driving, with terrain suited for many different RC 4x4s, even some of the more lifelike trail rigs that I enjoy building. This certainly isn't the case for everyone though, and even when it is, the weather can sometimes not exactly be ideal. When considering the recent popularity of smaller scale RC crawlers, which not only have the advantage of being less expensive than their larger scale counterparts, but they also don't require as much room to drive, naturally many hobbyists have chosen to build their own indoor crawler courses. When it comes to their construction, there are many different techniques and materials that can be used. Anything from basically turning your office desktop into a makeshift tiny crawler course to going all out with foam, cardboard, and plaster, replicating real-world rocks and terrain. Pre-constructed obstacles and kits can also be purchased, specifically designed to challenge even some of the most capable micro rigs, with them being able to be set up anywhere and sometimes even disassembled for easy storage. There's really no shortage of options. You're only limited by your imagination, budget, and space that you have to work with. Today I thought I'd work on a project that I started several years ago, and that's these modular, 3D printable crawler course pieces that you see here. The design is pretty self-explanatory. They slot right together, forming a path which the truck can be driven down, though of course I don't have to drive it from end to end. I can approach this terrain from any angle, sometimes providing more of a challenge. In addition to being a fun set of obstacles to drive over, I also wanted this to serve as a nice way to display some of my smaller scale RC models on the shelf, with the intention to paint and add some detail to these 3D printed pieces, helping to bring them to life. The design process was extremely simple. Using Autodesk Fusion, I created these base pieces that you see here. I made sure that they would be under 200 by 200 millimeters in order to fit the build plate on most 3D printers, including my Creality K1. Now the parts that you see here are two end pieces and a flat center. But as you can probably imagine, adding connecting points on 3 or more of those edges would be possible, as well as making pieces that start and end higher up for creating larger inclines and declines. But for now, this is what I've got as far as what I'll call the base piece. Now I could continue to work with these pieces within Autodesk Fusion if I wanted to, but what I decided to do was export these 3D models and then import them into Blender. Blender is a free and open source software that can be used for a wide variety of different projects. While Autodesk Fusion is great for mechanical design work, I was looking to take a bit more of an artistic approach with these particular models, so what I did was use Blender's sculpt mode to essentially play around with virtual clay. I applied a mask to the bottom and outer edges, especially around the connecting points, as I don't want those to be modified. After having some fun collecting reference images like these, I did the best I could to make things look more like rocks and ruts and mounds, though I'm far from a skilled digital sculptor here. Now, if you're new to sculpting in Blender, I would certainly recommend checking out a few tutorials to learn the basics, but a few things worth noting is when importing the model, the mesh might not be well suited for sculpting. Simply utilizing the remesh modifier can add more faces to be modified, as will the dynamic topology setting. When enabled, you can adjust the density of new faces that you want to be added to the mesh, allowing you to create finer details. Basically, it's adding new geometry to the model rather than simply modifying what already exists. I did the best I could and just had some fun and messed around for a while, but eventually it was time to get these pieces 3D printed. I used a Creality K1 to print all of these parts, and I chose to 3D print them vertically rather than with the bottom flat against the build plate, as I thought that this would produce a better looking finished result, rather than having the layering be more visible up top. It does take longer to print and requires some support for some of these pieces, but for me, I thought it was worth it for being a better looking finished product. Now you might be thinking that 3D printing individual crawler course pieces like this would be way more expensive than many other methods. And while without a doubt you can get more bang for your buck making a crawler course using different materials in more of a handmade fashion, if you've already made the investment in a 3D printer, the per piece cost is actually not as bad as you might think. Here I'm using low-cost PLA filament, which works just fine and provides a part that is plenty strong. Just be aware that PLA doesn't have great heat resistance, so if you're in a situation where you're going to be using these pieces outside in the hot sun, they could start to deform, and therefore 3D printing in a more heat-resistant material would be necessary. I'm intending to use these only indoors, so for me that's not going to be a problem. I'm also using a very low infill percentage here, meaning that these pieces are nearly entirely hollow inside. Within your slicing software, you can use a low infill percentage to reduce the amount of plastic that's necessary to print each part, while still maintaining a more than sufficient amount of strength. I could literally stand on these pieces if I wanted to without breaking them. Each of these pieces cost me around $2 or $3 to print. Again, certainly not the cheapest way to make micro-crawler obstacles or create an indoor crawler course, especially if it's going to take up a lot of square feet. But when compared to some of the pre-made crawler course obstacles and kits available on the market, 3D printing doesn't seem all that bad. Building things by hand is always fun, but digitally creating various different obstacles is enjoyable as well, and I dare say even a bit addictive. Whatever your preferred method or budget is, as long as you're having fun, that's what matters. One of the kind of cool things with this particular setup that I have here is I can change the order of any of these pieces. And then once they're all connected together, it helps keep them stationary so they don't just get pushed around by the trucks. You may be noticing that none of the terrain that I have here is particularly challenging. However, keep in mind that a lot of the smaller scale models that I've been building lately are pretty small and are more on the trail truck end of the spectrum rather than an all-out crawler, so that's definitely played into my design choices here with some of these pieces. If you're rocking a fully modded SCX24, you would probably want to get a bit more aggressive with your obstacles and terrain. I also want these pieces to sort of serve as a diorama that I can display some vehicles on, so the flatter sections make more sense in that context. But obviously, whatever terrain you create, it should be well suited for the types of vehicles that you want to run on it. I sort of tried to scale everything in a way here that would work with some of my smaller, true 1/24 scale rigs, but also accommodate some larger models as well, such as this Jeep, which was advertised as being 1/18 scale. This design sort of incorporates some ruts that, if I wanted to make look more accurate to these smaller scale models, I could simply shrink the scale of each of these pieces down within the slicing software before 3D printing. But as you can see, I've got a handful of different pieces here that I've 3D printed. And although they are a lot of fun to drive over, they aren't exactly looking all that natural, so I decided to see what I could do with some paint. Now, terrain painting and detailing is not exactly something I have a lot of experience with, but I decided to raid the shelves here at the shop to see what I had on hand that could kind of elevate the appearance of these pieces, and I ended up choosing these colors that you see here. Basically, the colors of dirt, rocks, and grass. I just sort of sprayed and splattered it on unevenly, layer by layer, hoping to get something that looked like off-road terrain. Very simple to do, and already just with those spray paints, it's moving in the right direction. But I continued by adding some more variety in the form of pastels and hand-painted details. There really wasn't a whole lot of technique being used here. I just sort of watered down some acrylic paint and made some areas look lighter, more like rocks, and then some areas look darker, referencing some pictures along the way for inspiration. Quite fun and relaxing, even though I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I think it's looking pretty good overall. Figuring out a nice way to add some texture would be cool. I'll have to look into that process more, but to help spice at least one of these pieces up, I went ahead and added some junk to it. I tried to add what might look like an old barbed wire fence, like what you see here, and some bushes. Again, all of this is just made with junk that I had sitting in the shop. Foliage specifically for model railroads and dioramas would probably be a little better for this type of project, but I'm just making do with what I had here on hand. And I think it's at least a good start to sort of add a bit of extra interest, texture, and realism to this crawler course / diorama. I think gluing in some objects like old tires and barrels and other random objects could help improve not only the appearance, but add some extra challenges to drive over. But for now, this is what I've got. Sort of a work in progress, sort of a proof of concept, sort of a learn as I go type of thing, but definitely a fun little project to work on here and there. There's obviously nothing like getting outside and doing some driving, but having some obstacles like this will be nice when I want to do a quick test with some of my custom 3D printed 4x4s I'm working on, or just want to have a little fun for a few minutes driving one of these vehicles. I am working on some more aggressive terrain and obstacles to have the option of making things a little more interesting. This piece here that I designed earlier is just enough to give this 1/18 scale Jeep a little bit of a challenge, especially when approaching from certain angles, but it does seem just a bit too much for this J10, so maybe I'll add in some loose rocks to help out that rig. But like I said, really the sky's the limit when it comes to these types of projects. Whatever tools and materials you're using, there's a lot of potential to build some cool stuff and have a lot of fun along the way. If you're interested in these particular models that I've designed here, I have posted them up on our Patreon for anyone who's interested, as well as the base pieces that I'm using if you want to load those into Blender or whatever software you want to use and work a little magic with the sculpting tools yourself. There's definitely some learning curve when it comes to Blender, but there's a ton of resources out there to learn more about the software as a whole and the sculpting environment in particular. But yeah, a very simple concept, and not at all a difficult thing to design, so whatever materials or tools you want to use, I hope this video has provided you with a bit of inspiration and motivation. But that's all I've got for today's video. As always, a huge thanks to all of the patrons and channel members who help make these videos possible, and of course a huge thanks to all of you for watching. Lots more cool stuff on the way, so be sure to stay tuned for more.